Another thing that really stood out to me from Martine's interview with you, Eric, was this kind of question of like what is agents? What are we going to see in the next year from agentic experiences? And he had like I thought a very good definition, or at least like two definitions of agents, right? One being that agents are, what we think of human agents, like customer support agent or travel agent, right? Something that you can communicate with. It sort of replicates that experience of talking to a human to accomplish a task, being kind of bucket A. And then bucket B being what a lot of people are excited about now, but we haven't seen really yet, is the ability for these models or agentic models to go and take action on your behalf over long periods of time. And I think that will be something we see more and more, is allowing these agentic systems to go, use your computer, use their web browser, and just go do things on the internet for you for hours and hours at a time, maybe even coding or using other just like human-like interfaces like a browser or a code IDE, right? And actively using them without human input. So I'm excited for both those experiences. Curious if you guys had thoughts on his discussion of agents.
I mean, this sort of leads into my voice AI panel, but basically everyone said we're going to pass the audio Turing test next year, i.e. end of 2025, saying we could be on the phone with a customer support agent and not know if they're a human or not the majority of the time. I buy that. Obviously, James, you and I have been prototyping a lot of voice AI game stuff recently, and it's unbelievably realistic. And I think that customer support is, in the end, fairly intellectually not very complicated. And so you could easily throw a fairly simple AI voice agent at customer support and handle 80% of support calls to the Apple or the AT&T phone numbers or whatever, like ASAP.
The voice discussion I thought was super interesting. I mean, sort of give us a sense of like, this was a larger panel, the sort of characters on it, and including yourself, and sort of where each of you sort of sits in the voice, what motivates each of you in terms of voice, and then what you thought was interesting out of it.
Yeah, I mean, so voice AI, I do think, even though I'm very biased, is a hot topic this year, and I think will be going forward, because talking to other people is obviously a huge portion of human civilization, and I think we're now able to replicate that. And so the people on the panel, we had two kind of tool/infra companies. We had Cartesia, which does voice output, i.e. synthesized AI voices. And then we had Deepgram, which is mostly known for speech recognition, but is also adding kind of large language models and also voice output. And then on the kind of product and application side, we had Character, which is famous for letting people chat with Tony Stark in a web browser. But what was interesting here was they've added a voice mode where you can actually call Tony Stark and have a conversation with him for as long as you want, or you can type to him and he'll chat back to you. And then there was myself hosting the panel. We make voice AI games that are powered by, chatting with a game show host, or, medieval times, convincing a knight to go slay a dragon or something like that. Two interesting things about the panel really stood out to me. One was, as I alluded to earlier, everyone's saying we're going to pass this audio version of the Turing test next year. As in, you're going to be able to talk to an AI and not know it's an AI for extended periods of time in the next 12, 14 months, whatever. Everyone's take was basically, this is going to revolutionize like the phone call as a meta concept, right? Like everything you can imagine doing a phone call for that isn't calling your friend or your mom or whatever is going to be completely revolutionized by the fact that a company is not going to need a person on the other end of the line, whether that's customer support or, just getting the hours of a business, or ordering from a restaurant, or, anything you could do a phone call for. We're no longer going to need humans. And that's going to be, I think, a huge, huge impact on the sort of cost structure of a ton of different companies. But also it might make people a lot more likely to call these companies to go solve their problems. That was interesting. And then the second interesting thing, more on the consumer side, which is where I focus, is the Character AI CPO, Aaron Teague, who spoke, said when they added the voice mode, they thought people were going to be calling these characters all the time. But they actually discovered that a lot of what people want to ask fictional characters is pretty embarrassing. Like, she specifically said in our pre-interview that she had wanted to ask Martin Luther King why he had cheated on his wife, as such an amazing, like, interesting figure in history. And she said, I obviously would never ask the real Martin Luther King that question, but I really wanted to know from this character version of Martin Luther King. And so I asked him this question, and he gave this really nuanced, thoughtful answer about how he, he was on the road all the time, and it was a really complicated existence, and he didn't have the best relationship with his wife, and he had failed morally in some ways while still being a civil rights leader, which I don't know. I thought that was a really interesting anecdote. Her point, though, was that people don't want to say this stuff out loud. They don't even want to hear themselves say this when they're speaking to an AI character. And so what's actually very popular with their voice mode is typing these kind of embarrassing questions in a box, whether on your computer or your phone, and then hearing the voice output from the character, because that creates this more kind of emotive experience and feedback from the character. So I thought that might be like the beginning of a kernel of insight of how people want to interact with AI characters. Maybe that's just specific to their company, but I don't know. I got a lot out of that discussion, and I thought it was really, really interesting.
A big question that you guys are probably facing as you place games, like the sort of reasoning engines, language models allow for these sort of unstructured interactions where it's, I ask, Martin Luther King a question, he gives me an answer. But do you think consumers generally want that, or do they want sort of a narrower path? It's like, well, in some ways in the traditional video game world, it's like, do they want all these sort of like open world games, or do they want sort of to be led along sort of a plot? I don't know. Do you think we're like taking the wrong thing from what LLMs can do, where we're giving up on sort of the structure because we can't? Yeah.
I would just make the point that like there's a lot of things you can do in games, but the mistake probably is to try to do everything at once with LLMs, right? So you could like design all the assets with LLMs, or you could have like these NPCs that you can talk to, or you could even design the quests themselves with LLM. All of those could be interesting if you do them really well,
right?
Sort of in isolation.
I do generally think, though, that to Eric's point, we at Volley definitely lean into the more structured experience side.
Yes.
As a one-liner, I think we believe people want more structure. We think people want a goal and something they have to do and a mission, to pursue in a game, and that LLMs can make that experience more fun and more natural.
I agree. That's what we are focused on at Volley. I think that obviously from characters' success, people also just want open-ended companionship in their characters, and they want to create like never-ending friendships that they can just kind of mold and adapt however they want on any given day. I think there is a value in the unstructured aspects as well.
I mean, to really step back, I feel like I'm faced with this question of, do I think AI is going to improve a lot next year? Like, how much are we sort of high on our own supply or not? You see lots of, I was very skeptical of self-driving cars along the way, and now I'm an extreme bull, wrote like very positive case and newcomer in the free press. But it's like, Silicon Valley loves bubbles, and like everybody involved sort of has an incentive to sort of lean into them and just sort of speculate, deduce sort of the next step, but can be wrong on sort of timing. So yeah, I guess throughout this conversation, I'm sort of riddled, by this debate we had on stage between sort of have we hit a wall or not. And I guess one thought I had listening to you guys is this sense that like one bull case for AI is honestly that the open text chat is really hard for people to get value out of. It's like, if you just have this it's like, why don't I use AI a lot? It's like, well, because I have to sort of come up with a plan and figure out what I want. And I think sort of tying a couple pieces together, it's like Martine's point. It's like you need companies that build a very clear use case, like what you're saying about games. You need to give people sort of a roadmap to use it. I do think, even if the reasoning doesn't improve as much as we want next year, there's just going to be a lot of like successfully leading the horse to water, or it's like showing the consumer or the business like how to use the AI we already have today in a much more productive way.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that these tools are amazing, but they're very unstructured to your point, and you really have to be sort of a creative person to sort of get value out of these AI. You have to imagine what it might be able to do and then keep throwing spaghetti at the wall until it does something amazing in many cases. Obviously one of the most overused line in Silicon Valley, but the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. Like everybody doesn't know about it yet. There's so much stuff this current generation of models can do that people don't take advantage of. And so much of that is going to be integrated into new types of applications, or making existing applications much better, or just new types of user experiences that allow people to get more value out of these AI tools we already have.
And as a lay user using OpenAI, I can be like, clearly I want it to have a repository of my stories and do stuff based on it, but I don't have access to a team of engineers to sort of like go do that. And if, a product is built that allows that, then even these use cases that I can sort of imagine will be sort of more at my fingertips than they are now. Anyway, that got very zoom out, but I think,
That's a good point.
Yeah.